Welcome to Look North, the main news from around Yorkshire today. Council workers brace for more job losses as services are cut to meet savings targets. And the woman accused of murdering a girl in a Doncaster park is told to prepare for a trial in July. Good afternoon. More than 1,000 job losses could be confirmed today as 4 Yorkshire councils set their budgets. Barnsley, Bradford, Doncaster and York are deciding how they'll save tens of millions of pounds in the new financial year. Yesterday, 1,000 job losses were announced when Leeds and Kirklees councils agreed their budgets. Here's our local government reporter, Emma Glasby.
Caring for the elderly and frail, cleaning the streets of our towns and cities, and running local libraries. Just some of the services at risk today as 4 Yorkshire councils confirm how they will save tens of millions of pounds. In York, the councils decided to reject a government grant and increase council tax.
Well, it's a very difficult decision, and we've done our best to make sure that we can protect the most vulnerable in society, which is why we're saying we have to increase council tax by 2.9%, and that will bring in £2 million to put into looked after children and also into elderly people's care.
Doncaster's been looking at reducing staff pay. Talks are being held and the pay cut could be called off, but the council wants to save £4 million on changing staff terms and conditions. In Barnsley, the council leader wants people to step in and maintain their own communities, instead of relying on the council for services like litter collections. Jobs are at risk again this year. Bradford Council is looking at cutting 600 staff. In Doncaster, around 350 jobs will go. Only yesterday, Leeds confirmed plans for 400 job losses, and Kirklees agreed a staff cut of 600.
This budget has been the most difficult since Kirklees Council was created in 1973, and it's very, very hard to make those sort of decisions that affect people's real lives. And if we didn't make those decisions, the alternative is that the council would become bankrupt in the future.
When they say cut back, we say fight.
Protests have already been seen this week as the budgets are confirmed. More campaigning is likely by the end of the day. Emma Glasby, BBC Look North.
And you can see more about the authorities that are planning a rise in council tax bills on the Sunday Politics from midday on BBC One on Sunday. The woman accused of stabbing 13-year-old Casey...
nightclub now worthy of a retrospective.
Well, there's been some blue sky in Leeds here today. The best of the sunshine, though, has been reserved for South Yorkshire. In fact, it's been one of the warmest February days for years. Join me later.
Good evening and welcome to Look North. Tonight, the downturn in the economy is really starting to hit home in all of our councils. Cuts to services and jobs are being approved by local authorities across Yorkshire as they try to save tens of millions of pounds. Amy has more details.
I do, thank you, Harry. Well, this is the time when councils meet to set their budgets for the next financial year. Their decisions have an impact on things like bin collections, care for the elderly and repairing the roads. But thousands of jobs are also at stake. Yesterday, between them, Leeds and Kirklees announced 1,000 posts are to be cut. Today, 4 other councils are meeting. In Bradford, 600 jobs are at risk as it tries to save £29 million. The numbers are much lower in Barnsley, but 45 people still face redundancy there. In Doncaster, 350 jobs are under threat and all staff face a pay cut. And in York, where a meeting has just started, 100 jobs are to go and council tax is to rise. While our local government reporter Emma Glasby is there for us now, where tough decisions are being made. Emma.
Basically, don't rely on Labour.
Well, Amy, you'll be able to see protesters have gathered tonight outside the Mansion House in York, but inside the meeting has just started. Tonight, York City Council is setting a 2-year budget with savings of almost £20 million. In fact, for several Yorkshire councils, it's been a day of talking about where to make the cuts. Caring for the elderly and frail, cleaning the streets of our towns and cities, and running local libraries. Just some of the services at risk as 4 Yorkshire councils confirm huge savings. Doncaster, Barnsley, Bradford and York are all Labour councils, but all have different ideas on where the cuts will fall. In Doncaster, they've been looking at reducing staff pay. Talks are being held and the pay cut plan could be dropped. But the council still wants to save around £4 million by changing terms and conditions for workers.
Make no mistake, we don't waste money in Doncaster anymore. The terms and conditions apply to holiday pay, sick pay and car mileage allowance, that sort of thing, and that will save us a considerable amount of money.
Meanwhile, in York, the council has decided council tax will have to rise.
Well, it's a very difficult decision. We've done our best to make sure that we can protect the most vulnerable in society, which is why we're saying we have to increase council tax by 2.9%, and that will bring in £2 million to put into looked after children and also into elderly people's care.
The Barnsley Council leader wants people to step in and maintain their own communities instead of relying on the council for services like litter collections. In Bradford, the council wants to save £29 million this year. 600 job losses are just one way they plan on doing that.
It's very hard. Where we can make savings on, on reducing everything we do virtually, then we do. But the vast majority of local government spending is about people. Therefore, if you're making cuts of this size, it's inevitable that it will be people.
All local services are being looked at for possible cutbacks, with several other Yorkshire councils setting budgets over the coming weeks. More tough decisions lie ahead. Well, let's speak to one of the protesters who's here in York tonight, James Cousins from York Stop the Cuts. Councils are getting less money from the government. They have to make the cuts, don't they?
No, they can defy the government. I mean, we don't want to let the Conservative Liberal Democrat government off the hook. It's true that they're making big cuts in local council budgets, but the council has a choice of either implementing those budgets, in effect colluding with the government cuts, or defying them and joining the anti-cuts movement, and that's what we're calling on them to do. It's been done in the past, for example, in Claycross in Derbyshire back in the 70s. It is possible to defy the government and join with us rather than just implementing these cuts.
But York City Council is actually defying the government because it's rejecting a government grant and increasing council tax, which the government doesn't want it to do, so it's trying to protect services.
It's not doing enough in our view. I mean, we've got loads of figures in our leaflets here about all the cuts that are going to go through. Right? And raising council tax isn't really the solution, because that's also going to hit local residents in York. That's not something that we see as a solution to this. I mean, there are lots of people who could be taxed in this society. I mean, we're in this financial crisis because of what happened in the banking system. There are still lots of very rich people in the UK. Those people should be taxed rather than the citizens of York.
Okay, thank you very much, James. Well, York City Council has actually taken the unusual step of allowing our TV cameras into the budget meeting tonight. We will, of course, bring you the latest on our late bulletin at 10:25.
Emma, thank you very much indeed. Well, Councillor Steve Houghton from Barnsley is with me now. When I pay my council tax, Mr Houghton, I expect certain services. In Barnsley, you're saying you'll notice that some services are missing?
Without a doubt.
What? Can you be specific?
One of the biggest worries we've had in the borough is the closure of an intermediate care home where people were rehabilitated after coming out of hospital to go back into the community. That's set to close. We'll have less youth workers next year. Grounds maintenance, grass cutting are all set to be reduced. And one of our most successful schemes for getting people back into work, the Future Jobs Fund, that's going to be brought to an end as well. So people are going to see a real difference.
So if people are seeing a real difference, why don't they see less in their council tax? It's only reasonable to presume that that could be possible.
If it was simply the case of the council tax funded local services, that might be possible. But in the end, most of our money comes from central government, and that money is being reduced substantially, up to 30% reductions for most councils. That means services will have to be cut.
Now, you know what some people will say. The big society, Mr Cameron's idea is that we should all do more. Aren't you doing Mr Cameron's work for him?
I don't think it's doing Mr Cameron's work. I think we have a responsibility as local authorities to try and fill the gaps that are going to be created. So that does mean councils doing things in different ways. Sometimes that's sharing services with other councils. We're actually working with the post office to put a post office into a library. That saves money, and that's good for both organisations. But it also means, I think, local communities having to do more as well.
Just one point, only 45 redundancies in Barnsley. Is that a measure of some success for you?
I think it is. We've worked very hard with the trades unions to get those numbers down through voluntary redundancies. We're using reserves to try and protect services as well. But I think we've also got to bear in mind there are another 4 years of cuts to come, and it's going to be very hard indeed.
Steve Houghton, thank you very much for joining us this evening. We'll have the latest, by the way, on that meeting in York on the late Look North at 10:25, and you can see more about the authorities that are planning a rise in council tax bills on the Sunday Politics show from midday on BBC One on Sunday.
Also tonight, an inquest heard how a teacher set...
With a medal this summer. James Pearce, BBC News in the Aquatic Centre.
Well, there's more on the BBC News channel, including a first look at tomorrow's front pages. Now we can join our news teams where you are this evening. Good night.
Good evening. The main news from Look North tonight. More than 1,000 job losses have been confirmed as 4 Yorkshire councils try to save millions of pounds in their budgets. Barnsley, Bradford, Doncaster and York all held meetings today to discuss how they can make savings. The news comes a day after Kirklees and Leeds Council announced job losses of 1,000. In a moment we'll hear from York, where councillors have just finished debating, but first here's Emma Glasby with the details.
Caring for the elderly and frail, cleaning the streets of our towns and cities, and running local libraries. Just some of the services at risk as 4 Yorkshire councils confirm huge savings. Doncaster, Barnsley, Bradford and York are all Labour councils, but all have different ideas on where the cuts will fall. In Doncaster, they've been looking at reducing staff pay. Talks are being held and the pay cut plan could be dropped. But the council still wants to save around £4 million by changing terms and conditions for workers.
Make no mistake, we don't waste money in Doncaster anymore. The terms and conditions apply to holiday pay, sick pay and car mileage allowance, that sort of thing, and that will save us a considerable amount of money.
Meanwhile, in York, the council has decided council tax will have to rise.
Well, it's a very difficult decision, and we've done our best to make sure that we can protect the most vulnerable in society, which is why we're saying we have to increase council tax by 2.9%, and that will bring in £2 million to put into looked after children and also into elderly people's care.
The Barnsley Council leader wants people to step in and maintain their own communities instead of relying on the council for services like litter collections. In Bradford, the council wants to save £29 million this year. 600 job losses are just one way they plan on doing that.
It's very hard. Where we can make savings on, on reducing everything we do virtually, then we do. But the vast majority of local government spending is about people. Therefore, if you're making cuts of this size, it's inevitable that it will be people.
All local services are being looked at for possible cutbacks, with several other Yorkshire councils setting budgets over the coming weeks. More tough decisions lie ahead.
Well, Emma Blackburn's been at York's council meeting this evening and she joins us live now. Emma, how did it go?
Well, it was a difficult meeting with a lot of debate lasting well over 3 hours. And it was so long that they had to put a curfew on at 10 o'clock to make sure it didn't even go on for any longer. Now, it was unusual in the fact that they let us film inside the meeting. And as you might expect, when deciding how to make cuts of up to £20 million, feelings were running high. Now, protesters were even gathered outside the Mansion House before the meeting began, making their feelings about the cuts known. Now, the outcome of that meeting was that £20 million will have to be saved by rising council tax by 2.9% and job losses of up to 100. Speaking to me earlier, the Labour council leader told me it hasn't been an easy decision.
For some of us, it's the biggest decision that we've taken so far in the administration, or as new councillors, a very big decision. It's the toughest budget in a generation, and therefore it's not easy.
The better news is that no libraries, no children's centres or leisure centres will have to close, but still a lot of cuts and losses to contend with. And other councils in Yorkshire will be making similar decisions about their budgets in the next few weeks.
Emma, thank you. And we will be following the council's budget cuts over the next few days here on Look North. We'll bring you the latest. Also tonight, an inquest has heard how a teacher set